We're going to talk about wedging. Wedging is important for getting the clay made consistent. It's important for getting air that might be trapped in the clay out, and it's also important for getting you warmed up and in connection with the clay. So we start every session with wedging. There are two different types of wedging. There's ram's head method and there is spiral wedging. Ram's head is better for smaller amounts and spiral is better for when you want to start working with bigger amounts of clay. If you're not planning on throwing one big piece of clay on the wheel, you don't necessarily need to move on to spiral wedging. Ram's head is perfectly good enough. I'm also going to talk through, we've got 3 different consistencies of clay here, and clay is very sensitive to the season, so you might need to work with it in a different way at different times of the year, or depending on what consistency your clay body is at on that specific day. So to start, this piece here I maybe left out drying on my plaster Paris slab for a bit too long. It's a bit more stiff, so in that case I would like to actually wet up my work surface with a little bit of water, either a sponge or spraying down the table. Not too much because then your clay slips and slides, but just enough that it's not going to be dried out by the clay on the canvas. And I've got 2 pieces of clay here, which is great. I can mix those together, but I need to just make sure that I slam them together so that there's no air to begin with. And then I can begin my wedging process. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through what that looks like. This piece here is maybe a bit too soft, so this one I could wedge on a plaster of Paris slab. That will pull the moisture out of the clay as I'm wedging. So in winter we often do this. So you could almost say this is the winter wedging surface, and we keep these around the studio. You can pull them out at any point to use them. And this is the summer working surface. So just to break that up, we're going to get into the different techniques now. I'm first going to show you how to do the ram's head method. The reason it's called ram's head method is because if you're getting it right, it looks like a ram's head. You'll see it at the end. Okay, so to start, just the first time you're doing this, or the first few times, you're going to start by making your clay into a square. You don't have to do this every time. This is just so that your hands learn where to position themselves. So I've got my square, it doesn't have to be perfect, and I'm going to put the palms of my hands on either side of the square and wrap my fingers around the back of the square. So I've got my hands positioned like that, and the heel of my hands are going to drive towards the center. So we can almost make a dot there to see. Then a lot of wedging is about how you position your body. I'm going to put 1 foot back, 1 foot forward, and tip my weight into the front foot so that I'm not having to use too much like muscle power. It's actually working smart. Okay, so hands on either side, fingers wrapped around, heel of the hand drives towards that center point. I'm tipping my weight into my front foot, then rocking my whole body back and the clay, and then grabbing either side of the squares again, the square, and fingers wrapped around that back side, to you it would be the front side. Make my little dot again, heels of my hand driving forward, and I'm keeping my fingers wrapped around the sides and the back of the square. Again, rocking back with my body, rocking back with the clay, hands on either side of the square and fingers wrapped around the back. Make my little dot and off I go. So that's what it looks like in action. And the reason that I try really emphasize hands on either side of the square and keeping those fingers wrapped around is because if you don't do that, the temptation is to just keep smushing the clay down. And we end up with this splayed wing sort of thing happening. And then as we try and fold that over, we're actually working more air into the clay than out. So we want to keep it really tight and keep your hands containing the clay. Don't let your fingers go, and keep the horns pressed in. So it's called ram's head because we've got the ram's head, and those are the horns that you want to keep pushed in. So now we're going to get into spiral wedging. My clay has dried out a little bit, so I'm just going to lightly mist the table that I'm working on. And for this, you want to start with a ball of clay. No need for it to be a square. And we're going to create a W with our hands. So you're keeping your hands connected in the same way that we do when we're throwing on the wheel. And I'm going to place my hands over the top of this circle and press down with the heel of my hands. But as I press down, my right hand is almost creating more force than my left, and my left hand is sort of pulling up. So I'm creating like a twisting action. And what's cool about the spiral wedging is that we're actually just working on the top third of the clay. The bottom third just gets worked back in. So you can wedge up a really big piece of clay without too much force or effort. So I'm pushing my hand down and twisting at the same time. So pushing down and lifting up with my left. Right hand pushes down, left hand almost, it does push, but it almost lifts more than it pushes. And if you're keeping your hands connected, that means you'll be keeping the clay nice and contained. And that bottom bit just keeps working its way back up into the top section. It's quite a strange feeling, and it takes time to reprogram your hands with the spiral wedging, especially if you've been working on ram's head for a few years. And you know you're getting it right when you've got a sort of shell shape happening. As you finish wedging, you're going to slowly release the pressure, so just going a little bit lighter with each rock. And then rocking it over, and then we've got a perfect little ball of clay there. When I'm throwing bigger, I actually like my clay to be more of a teardrop shape like this, so that I can drop it onto the wheel and then it makes a nice dome.